Good morning, everyone. It's just 10:02. We have about close to 50 people on the line. So I think we should get started. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. On behalf of OVIN, the Ontario Vehicle Innovation Network, the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, and Metrolinx, I'd like to welcome you all to today's Ontario Smart Mobility Readiness Forum. We are thrilled that so many of you could be with us here today. My name is Stephanie Rodriguez, and I am the Manager of Strategic Initiatives at OVIN, and I will be your host for today. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the land on which we gather. OCI's work takes place on the traditional territories across the province. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work and live in these territories, and we are thankful to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples who have cared for these territories since time immemorial and who continue to contribute to the strength of Ontario and to all the communities across the province. I'd now like to invite all of you to put in the chat where you are joining us from today, and of course, what municipality you're representing, and feel free to acknowledge the land as well. As you know, the purpose of convening this group is that you are all able to make connections and learn from each other and share resources. So it's really helpful for us to see who's joining and again, what municipalities we can learn from by convening together. On that note, I'd also like to highlight our LinkedIn group, which is for members of this forum. Shireen will put the link in the group, put the link in the chat. And if you haven't joined, please do join that group because we do like to try and continue this dialogue. And again, it's a great way for us to make connections. I'd also like to just note, in case you missed it, this meeting is being recorded. So hopefully everyone's okay with that. But also if you have colleagues that couldn't join, they will still be able to access this information, which will be posted on our website, and we'll share that link as well. Okay, so on to today's topic. Ontario Public EV Charging Infrastructure Initiatives, and specifically supporting EV readiness outside of Ontario's large urban centres. As you probably are all aware, this is a very timely topic with MTO's funding announcement that recently came out. And so we're thrilled to be having this discussion today. And we have a great lineup of speakers. So starting with Tori Prowse from the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. Then we are going to hear from Danielle Weiss of Community Energy Association. And finally, Jordan Hebert from Ox Energy, which is a subsidiary of Hydro One Limited. There will be time for Q&A after each speaker. So we ask you to put your questions in the chat and we will get to them. Okay, so with that, I will introduce our first speaker. Tori Prowse is a Senior Policy Advisor in the Emerging Technologies Office at the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. Tori's work focuses on how to facilitate a seamless transition to a low-carbon mobility future for Ontario's residents, communities, and businesses. Tori, over to you.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thanks so much for having me here today. Really excited to share more information about our new public infrastructure, EV infrastructure charging program that we launched on October 20th. So for those of you this is the first time hearing about the program, we did a more technical webinar yesterday. For the purposes of this presentation today, I'm going to focus more on the high-level elements of the program, but by all means, we will be posting the materials of yesterday's webinar on our project website. So for that deeper dive, feel free to either ask questions or check that out as well. So great. So just to start things off, to provide an overview of where Ontario is today in the EV charging landscape. So Ontario has around 3,000 public EV charging stations, though, as no surprise, largely concentrated in urban settings in Southern Ontario. Rural areas right now have 30% fewer public chargers per capita than urban areas, which, may not be surprising considering rural uptake of EVs is also lower than urban areas right now. Approximately 45% of Ontario's broader provincial highway network is EV ready. In MTO, we define EV ready as having an EV charging station every 80 kilometers. Most gaps exist in Northern Ontario. And so, for example, the 400 series highways, they are all EV ready. Most of those gaps are in more rural and northern areas. Also, there is discrepancies between sort of the distribution of level 3 charging versus level 2 charging in different communities and regions. Northern Ontario is the only part of the province with more level 3 chargers, which are the fast chargers that are more suitable for, highway use cases versus the level 2 chargers. And so what that suggests is there is a demand and a need for more community-based charging in Northern Ontario, for example. Okay. All right, so we have the, the sort of where we're at from an infrastructure perspective, but just also wanted to share what we've heard about the unique challenges in terms of EV infrastructure deployment facing small, rural, and northern communities in particular. And so I think first, really wanted to highlight that, this is for folks that are just getting into this world, this can be really intimidating. It's a fast moving, constantly changing space. We've seen, over the summer as we were designing the program, different changes in the industry related to different connector types and so on and so forth. So it can be quite intimidating from a sort of internal capacity perspective. And I think there's a desire for some leadership and setting some, priorities and I guess guidelines in that space. We've also heard that there is, a lack of financial capacity in these smaller municipalities, especially where EV uptake is low, to really make that case for taking a bit of a risk with putting these EV chargers in these areas where demand is low and we may not see that uptake increase for some period of time. And so that's tricky because it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation in terms of providing the infrastructure so that people feel more comfortable with being able to say, yeah, I actually see myself integrating this new sort of practice of fueling up, if you will, in my daily life. Range anxiety is a real concern that we hear specifically from municipalities in rural and small and northern areas. Especially I'm sure you've all heard these horror stories about, for example, in Northern Ontario, where I'm located, individuals arrive at a charger and it's broken. And so they actually have to get towed to the next community to finish their journey. And so these are real issues and certainly exacerbated in these rural, smaller, and northern communities. So the EV Charge On program, what is it? Well, we have $91 million to invest in public EV charging infrastructure outside of large urban centers. And so that is in communities of less than 170,000 people. As part of that, Ontario is also focusing on our government sites, carpool lots, highway rest areas, and provincial parks, and making sure that there are EV charging options in those areas as well to help fill the gaps in the network. So really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is, the long-term goal, encourage people to switch to EVs, feel more comfortable about that being a reliable and seamless choice for them. And how do we do that? We increase the number of charging stations throughout Ontario, reduce that feeling of range anxiety, and specifically in areas outside of large urban centers where there is sort of less of a business case and more of a need for financial support at this time. Oop. So again, I'll go through these program details kind of at a high level today, but happy to go through specific questions if folks have any. At this time, we really tried to make the application parameters as broad as possible. And so in terms of who can apply, it really is quite broad. Businesses, not-for-profits, municipalities, indigenous communities and organizations, and broader public sector organizations such as hospitals, colleges, universities, so on and so forth. You do have to be the property owner or have written approval from the owner. Local distribution companies, utilities are not eligible to apply. In terms of specifics, the charging stations do have to be publicly available 24/7. And so that is the sort of main sticking point in terms of eligibility. Chargers that are, for example, if you're thinking about a sort of shared fleet situation that is sometimes public, sometimes for fleet, unfortunately that wouldn't be eligible for the program. Okay, going into some high-level site requirements here. If anyone is familiar with the Zero Emission Vehicles Infrastructure Program, that's Natural Resources Canada's initiative, this is very similar. But wanted to flag a few key differences and points of further detail here. We have set our minimum charger threshold much lower than ZEVIP. We are asking for a minimum of at least 4 ports per project for level 2 chargers, and then for level 3 chargers, a minimum of 1 port if you're co-locating with a level 2, or if not, a minimum of 2 ports that would be on their own posts, standalone level 3 chargers. As I mentioned earlier, the technology in this space is constantly changing, and so while we were designing the program in the summer, the real North American alignment around the North American charging standard became apparent, and so we worked closely with our colleagues at NRCan, had several conversations with colleagues in British Columbia and other programs to make sure that we were from a eligible ports perspective, capturing requirements that would be future focused, but also reflecting that there will be a large proportion of vehicles on the road for a number of years with the CCS ports from a level 3 perspective. And so we are requiring that a minimum of 25% of the connectors be CCS, while the remainder can be the connector of your choice. We've heard a lot from folks across Ontario of frustration around the lack of interoperability, specifically related to payment standards. And so you can drive across the province and have to download 5 different apps to pay for your charging sessions. And what we really wanted to do here was set a sort of minimum service standard, in that we are asking that the chargers funded through this program include at least one payment method that doesn't require a charging network account, membership, or app. And so this can work, you can go very high tech or low tech on this front. Credit card reader, built into the charging station is sort of one extreme, though that is, quite expensive. At the other extreme, simply a telephone number that folks can call and pay via telephone as well. And then finally, accessibility. So what we have proposed for the program is really the accessibility requirements will be conforming with the local standards, though we do encourage you to sort of think above and beyond. Certainly reflect this in the application submission of how you've integrated, more accessibility requirements and considerations in your project. And so though Ontario doesn't have our own set of EV accessibility standards or guidelines yet, other jurisdictions do and are great reference points. So for example, British Columbia has a great guide, as well as the United States federally has an accessible charging station guidelines. And so those are great spots for ideas. Thinking about extra wide bays, things like, awnings, increased lighting, increased signage, those things. So I encourage you to check out those resources. And so just to go over a high level in terms of funding available for project, again, we have designed the program to be stackable with the ZEVIP funds, and also funding that is disseminated through ZEVIP delivery organizations. And so these funding thresholds per charger output are aligning with those the ZEVIP program. So just as a highlight, municipalities and Indigenous communities can be reimbursed for up to 75% of project costs. And then if you are stacking that with another funding source, can get up to 90% for all applicants, except for businesses. And then for other applicants that aren't municipalities and Indigenous communities, the funding is available for reimbursement up to 50% of the total project cost. And so a bit about how we're evaluating these applications. And just a flag, I know that some other programs take submissions on a rolling basis. For us, there really is no rush. We really want you to take your time. We will take all the applications that we've received as of January 31st, 2024 at 5 p.m. and assess them all holistically. So what we really want to see come out of these applications, specifically with the project rationale, is emphasizing to us why the site, why the project is locally significant, and what local benefits will this infrastructure bring to your community. You are the experts of your communities, and so we want to you need to tell us why this makes sense and why this is the most appropriate location. So we're really looking for that local lens, and hopefully that is very clear in the applications that you put forward. We're also, using a geospatial tool to help us with applications, in addition to the review of the written portions of the submission. And so what that's looking at is things like, gap filling, proximity to high demand in terms of traffic, and different elements of that piece as well. In terms of operations and maintenance and capacity to deliver, just wanted to highlight a couple points here. Recognizing that many applicants submitting to the program will not have experience with deploying EV charging infrastructure. And that is okay. That is, why we designed the program to be that way, and really encourage these sort of first time forays into the EV charging space. What we'd love to see in the application is really making it clear to us, what other comparable projects or capital asset management experience does your organization have that is comparable, and that would make us feel comfortable with your organization being successful in delivering the project and then operating and maintaining the project. And so by no means are we, suggesting or requiring you to go out and hire EV charging, experts in terms of those pieces. If you would like to do that you're certainly welcome to, but we really want to know, what are the transferable skills that your organization has to make it a success. Okay, and so just to sort of summarize, we really made a concerted effort to make this program approachable, non-intimidating, and hopefully get some really good uptake from small rural and northern communities. And so a few things just to flag that we were very intentional about. Again, it's keeping that low minimum charger thresholds quite low. for folks that are, wanting to sort of use this as a pilot project per se, and get your community comfortable with the world of EV charging. We've also identified or required that each site be its own application. And so instead of, for example, a municipality submitting for 7 different sites, each site will have to be submitted separately. Though that is, I understand a bit of an administrative annoyance, and I apologize. We thought, first these smaller communities, if each site is submitted individually, it will be much quicker for you to recoup your cost and get your money back. And so when each site is finished, reimbursement can, proceed versus having to wait for the entire network project complete. And so hopefully that is helpful in terms of making sure these projects are financially viable. We want to make sure, this really can serve as a capacity building exercise for a couple of dimensions. And so first, I think, though there aren't any federal standards yet or provincial standards around EV stations, we're excited that CSA is working on this right now. But our site requirements, our guidelines do serve as kind of a minimum standard that we can start to think about provincially in terms of funded infrastructure. And so hopefully that helps people start to think about that as well. And then, as I mentioned, with showing us your transferable skills that you have to apply to the EV charging installation, operation, and care. Hopefully that can be a learning experience for for that side as well in terms of delivering and maintaining the infrastructure. Another thing to flag, we are giving a small scoring bonus to small and medium enterprises that apply. And so we felt, particularly in areas outside of large urban centers, SMEs play a huge role in the economy. And, we want to make sure that they have the ability to be successful in this program where, again, this may be a very new experience. For those types of applicants as well, and applying to a funding program of this type. Okay, so just a word about what we're doing on Ontario sites, highway restaurant stops, provincial parks, and carpool lots. We're currently looking at the selection of candidate sites and really feasibility of developing EV charging stations that can, help with alleviating those gaps in the network from a highway perspective. Over the summer, MTO released an RFI from the charging industry and stakeholders, really looking for guidance and feedback on what the best approach would be for design, installation, operation, and maintenance of these EV chargers. And so, as I said, we're currently assessing prospective locations and hope to have a sort of short list of these locations coming soon. Okay, and just in my sort of closing few minutes, I really wanted to take things up a level, really to think about a more strategic perspective in terms of what, charging infrastructure is certainly an incredibly important part of Ontario's EV readiness, but it really does require a whole of government approach. And so what we've started to do internally is start to think about that big picture. So what are all the pieces across ministries that give us that true EV readiness for Ontario? And so You have, for example, the supply side. Ontario has made significant strides in targeting and attracting these amazing investments in terms of becoming a future of mobility automaker and considering battery manufacturing as well. Great steps towards increasing the supply of vehicles. From a critical minerals perspective, the critical minerals strategy also helps with that in terms of a made in Ontario supply chain. But then there's also elements from an increasing, infrastructure perspective beyond EV charging. So, and this will probably come at no surprise, but making sure the electrical grid is prepared and ready to take on this electrified mobility future. Also thinking about, not just public charging, but private charging, and how do you reduce red tape around making sure people can put chargers in homes in a seamless manner. Also thinking about transportation system adaptation broadly. So for example, the gas tax, what is a sustainable alternative to that revenue source that we will inevitably, see decline with the increased uptake of EVs. And so there's that piece, and then thinking about the demand side as well. So skill development, consumer support experience, and then also making sure that when we're thinking about EVs and electrification, we're not just thinking about passenger vehicles. So how do we encourage electrification of transit networks? How do we encourage use of electric micromobility as well? And part and parcel of that comes the question, what role does the government play in terms of community public education, broader community awareness? How do we ensure, that municipalities feel like they have the confidence and the tools at hand to facilitate this electrical mobility transition in a way that works for residents and businesses? And so just we have started thinking of that. We're looking at a sort of uniform transportation electrification policy. And so I think, that's really exciting, and hopefully you can see sort of this EV charging program fitting in with this broader context. And so just back to Charge On as I close out. Some quick time or dates to flag. There will be additional webinars for this program. I believe the next one is in late November, but please check the website to make sure. And we'll also, accept email support. Happy to have one-on-one conversations with folks as well, if you would like that support. The application period closes on January 31st. And then in the spring, we will be announcing the successful projects. Great. Well, thanks so much. I think I went a bit over time. My apologies.
No, that was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you, Tori. Perfect. Okay, so I see that people are putting questions in the chat, and thank you to Adam Rosenfeld, who is fielding those questions. I think in the interest of time, we will keep moving. And Tori, if any more questions come in for you, we'll try and take them at the end. Otherwise, we will post any questions in our LinkedIn group. So just a reminder, if you are not a part of that LinkedIn group, please do join, and I'll get Shireen to put the LinkedIn link in the chat here. Also, if you joined sort of after we started, please do put into the chat where you're joining from. It's, I think for everyone on this call, it's really exciting to see, cohesively as a province, what we are all, we have the opportunity to do. And it's great to see all the different municipalities represented. And it's a great segue into our next presentation, which is coming from Danielle Weiss, who is, excuse me, Director of Transportation Initiatives at Community Energy Association. CEA is a national nonprofit working to accelerate bold action by local governments and Indigenous communities related to energy and climate. Danielle, welcome, and over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. Good morning, everyone. And I am in charge here. There we go. All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, as mentioned, Danielle Weiss, Director of Transportation Initiatives at CEA. Just wanted to take a moment and, of course, recognize the lands on who I'm joining on behalf of today. I am joining on behalf of the Ktunaxa peoples. I'm over in Western Canada, as we call it today. So thankful that they get to share their land and allow me to live and work here. Beautiful spot if you've never been out this way. So today just wanted to tell you a little bit about a regional approach for economic and tourism development. Perhaps you've seen this presentation before if you joined the Electric Autonomy conference there back in May, or maybe if you haven't, but just wanted to mention different way to approach getting your community on the EV charging map. And I'll be joined later by some municipal representatives from across this region. Just a bit about CEA before we dive in, because you're wondering why I was invited from this side of the country to join today. As noted, we work with local governments and Indigenous communities, as well as the provincial and federal governments, on anything that supports climate action. So we help with initiating programs and program design. We help manage lots of project management and a lot of communications and education. One of the things we've learned over the years of doing our work is you can do the first two really, really well, but without good communications, education, and outreach, our experience includes transportation, buildings, and waste, and our staff of 50 was 17 just 4 short years ago. So this slide's probably pretty old. I'm sure we have expertise in a lot more. And as noted, we work to accelerate bold action by local governments and Indigenous communities related to energy and climate. So one of the things we do specifically is help with regional EV charging efforts. This map is a summary of the work that we've done to date in Western Canada. It all started with the dark blue lines. That's what project we've called Accelerate Kootenays. And the story here is an important one to share because it's the same story that passes through all of these regions and even comes over to Ontario, which is of course why I'm here today. Charging infrastructure, electric vehicle adoption had started, I'd say 2015, lightly in the lower mainland portion of BC. And folks were driving there and driving in and around there. And networks at the time extended a bit outside of the lower mainland, but not too far. And it was the recognition of several mayors and different council members across the Kootenay region, which is where the dark blue lines are, that said, wait a second, if folks are driving electric vehicles now and they're limited by where they can go by electric vehicle charging infrastructure, that means they're not coming to our region anymore. And so they recognize that as a gap in tourism opportunities and also economic development. And so that reality has spurred all of these other networks that we have been a part of. So we finished Accelerate Kootenays, and not too long, or actually I wouldn't even say it was done, folks on the Alberta side of the border were calling and saying, well, now that folks can travel to your region, they can't come to our region. So how do we bring this regional collaboration to our side of the border? And then central and northern BC followed from there, along with the middle part of Vancouver Island. And we're continually working on bringing infrastructure as well to central and northern Alberta, which is the purple lines. They are a huge gap on the charging map if you go on PlugShare, not unlike portions of rural Ontario. So programs such as these that we're talking about today are going to make a huge difference when it comes to bringing along everyone on the electrification journey, which is how it should be from an equity standpoint. So that's a little bit about what we've been doing in Western Canada, and a little bit closer to home. We have a project that we've been working with at least the 6 counties represented on screen, over a dozen municipalities within these counties, if not more, to build a baseline EV charger network. Ultimately, it'll be across this region. Ultimately, it'll be about 20-ish sites for level 3 chargers and 10 or more level 2 sites with a minimum of 4 charging ports per location. Those level 2 sites, we refer to them as level 2 charging banks, a large reserve of level 2 chargers publicly focused, of course, and hopefully in locations, or actually intentionally in locations that not only service people during the day, but also during the evening. So who could be using them while they're living in a nearby multi-unit residential building or other type of accommodation that might not have charging infrastructure available to them. Seems pretty obvious, but I'll say it anyways. Installing charging infrastructure that isn't going to be highly used is an expensive endeavor. So putting infrastructure where it's going to be used as often and as much as possible is certainly the goal of designing this network. So how did this network come about? It all started with a strategy. So the key points of the strategy are that at the time, and the image on the right, a bit blurry, but that's okay because it wasn't really here for navigating, but more just to show that at the time there was little infrastructure across this region that we're talking about, which extends basically north of the Kitchener-Waterloo boundary, west over to the shores of Bluewater and Godrich, all the way up to the Bruce Peninsula, and then kind of back south on the eastern side, not including Collingwood, is kind of where the line is drawn. So this is the current charging infrastructure. This might be a little bit old. I know a few things have gone in since we did this last spring, but not really enough to facilitate interregional travel. Certainly you could go there and you could drive an electric vehicle and you could stop in a few key spots, but you'd have to be very thoughtful and planful with how you approached your journey. And you wouldn't be able to, you know, duck off a side road and take in this amenity or explore that area for too long, because what about your charge? Or what if it was really hot, you know, the day that you were out adventuring and, you know, you weren't sure you're going to make it back to the next stop. So the same problem we've seen time and time again when it comes to rural and more remote areas, just not enough infrastructure to facilitate the type of travel that people are used to and kind of expect. It leaves those who aren't serviced by this infrastructure on the outside looking in, and that can be from municipalities who might have people stopping in and taking in their community assets, or to local businesses, you know, ones that might exist right now on one of these highway routes that people can't travel because there's no EV chargers down that path. So that's where it started. There was a recognition by folks that are part of the project that there's a lack of charging infrastructure. And again, therefore, folks are missing out. They're inhibiting tourism to the region and local adoption of electric vehicles, of course. And what they recognized and why they came, or what was set out to develop a EV network strategy, was that collaboration is key. There is a lot more that they could do as a collective than they could approach individually. And the reason for that, of course, is I bring up a slide that refers to the Peaks to Prairies project, which is the Alberta version of rural recharge, or the Southern Alberta version of rural recharge. And some of the numbers after the network was implemented and first getting started. Do note that it kicked off, I think the last charger went in like the week before COVID. So the numbers were a bit smaller than anticipated, but they've rebounded since people have been traveling more freely. But 1,400 kilometers of highway were connected, you know, a $2 million investment into the region. That wouldn't happen if it was just one community of about 10,000 people endeavoring into this on their own. You know, there's something to be said for power in numbers. So just reiterating that point and why rural recharge is a collaboration. When it comes to developing the network strategy, just wanted to give a quick overview of what that is. You know, we did the current state analysis. We understood, or we attempted to understand, what challenges and opportunities existed by engaging with EV drivers and residents. You know, we wanted to hear from the people who were driving electric vehicles and what they've encountered, but also from the folks who aren't right now or may never, and why, or what perceptions they had about the challenges, so that we could consider those in designing the network. We modeled future scenarios, you know, whether it was to be building out a base network as we have now, or if it was going to be more. We spent a lot of time developing siting criteria. Tori talked about this in her presentation about some of the evaluation metrics they'll have. not only is it important from a funding perspective, but it's important from a design perspective and making sure that this large investment into infrastructure is going to be most beneficial to all. And we also helped identify options for implementation. There's different ways to own and operate this infrastructure, and there's also different funding streams, of which is one we're talking about today. Getting to implementation, just wanted to note and credit for the image on the right to Dufferin County and Sarah McCrae that works there. This network strategy has been on this journey. I won't stop on all the points there, but just say that we've selected a network owner operator. So we're kind of at the RFP stage and we're getting ready, obviously, to apply for these stations for funding, hence why we're here today. But it takes a lot of work. Getting started is the hardest part, bringing together those who want to collaborate and figuring out the terms for collaboration can often be a little bit awkward and sticky, but honestly, once you jump through that or make it through that, it really just starts to flow. Yeah, and the first steps require a bit of time and effort, but once you get them going, these kind of projects kind of build their own momentum and carry on forward in time. And I'm just going to invite, I wanted to make sure I got to this. So if there's any questions, I may have rushed through the last few pieces, but just let me know. I just wanted to invite two of the municipality representatives who are part of this collaboration. Jerry Wallace from Huron County, who's the climate change and energy specialist, and Hannah Can, who's with Perth County and the resiliency and stewardship coordinator. And it's great for me to say as a consultant all the benefits and why you should do this work, but definitely better for you as their peers to hear directly from them. So they're going to share a bit about benefits of this approach to a regional EV network. So I see Hannah's there. So Hannah, why don't you take on?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So for Perth County, we're kind of in the middle between the lake and a lot of larger urban centers. So we're kind of what I like to call a flyover state. So it's really important for us to be connected with this network regionally because we want people to stop and enjoy time in our communities, which have really rich and vibrant tourism opportunities that might go overlooked because we're not just like a beach town, but we're on the way to the beach town. So having that regional connection to the urban centers and to the kind of high profile locations is really important for us. And it also helps bring valuable infrastructure to residents in our communities that are really small, for the Charge On program that under 170,000 people, like our community of West Perth, for example, is under 9,000 people. So we're really small. We want to be able to input this type of technology as a service to our community without using taxpayer dollars because like everywhere, taxes are going up, and it's really important for these councils to make strict financial decisions. So being able to go in on a regional scale on funding applications is a really great win for everybody across the board. And then, of course, it's a great way for each individual lower tier municipality to build council buy-in because they're seeing, oh, but our neighbors are doing it. We should do it too. We have to be competitive with our neighbors. So it kind of helps those more frugal councils take that jump and make those investments. So with that, I can answer any questions or I'll pass it off to Derry.
Awesome. Thanks, Hannah. I'll take it away for now, and then maybe people can ask questions at the end. All that Hannah said is true for Huron County as well. We are located along the lake, so people do come to us for the beaches, which is lucky. But for our county, this approach and this partnership essentially helped us more easily attract consultants and funding opportunities, which is huge for small municipalities with limited staff resources and time. So that collaboration approach has really been beneficial to us, especially in the ongoing process of not only creating that strategy that Danielle mentioned, but also getting towards the implementation stage and attracting that large investor that will own and operate this network. So it's not on municipal resources as well. The benefit as well of going in with multiple counties and multiple local municipalities is also the fact that we're not going to be replicating infrastructure, especially near the borders of our municipalities. So this approach allowed us to see where the infrastructure would be best utilized for both residents and visitors, and ensure that the money and the infrastructure is going where it is necessary and not being replicated. This also just helps. I found it be really crucial to have this partnership to just demonstrate the innovation and the collaboration that does happen pretty regularly within small and rural municipalities in Ontario. We don't have the big bucks, but that doesn't mean we don't have the mindset and desire to want to innovate and create more opportunities for our communities. So that's a large takeaway that myself and our council and our staff have gotten from this project together. So with that, I'll just hand it back to Danielle, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thanks both. Yeah, and so in summary, here we go. Rural Recharge, this is the official launch of the brand for the project. So there you go, first eyes on it. But again, it's a 6-county initiative, over a dozen municipalities, building a baseline EV charging network so that folks can travel to and through and with back and forth in the region with great ease and success. We want EV adoption to be something that people don't have too many hesitations about, and so that's the driver for this initiative. And I'll defer to Stephanie if we're going to take questions now or maybe later.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much, Danielle, Hannah, and Derry. That is very inspiring story. And I love, again, we're just exemplifying this, Danielle, as you said, power in numbers and collaboration is the key. So again, looking at all the folks that are joining and where you're joining from, it does make sense, I think, to, look at your neighbors and figure out as a group, as a collective, what can you achieve? I'm sure also just the amount of resources, if you pool together, whether it's HR resources, different expertise, what a great way to, launch this project and then actually see the results. So congratulations. I have a question actually that came directly to me. So the question is, how did this collaboration start? Like which municipality came to who? How did that come about?
Oh, thanks, Stephanie. I was just quickly scanning to see if one of our participants is here. No, she's not. Okay, so I'll answer on her behalf. So Karen Chisholm, who's with the County of Wellington, she kicked this off. So she's been a part of this project since its inception, kind of never coming up on a year and a bit, and basically had seen some presentations about regional networks in Western Canada at an FCM event, and had said, well, if they're doing it there and it's working, why can't we do it here? So she was the impetus for this network and this collaboration. She reached out to her surrounding counties, and she started the conversation. And as simple as that sounds, it's a really big deal. It's not in Ontario. It's not only happening in Ontario. Anecdotally, from our experience working in Alberta, one of the biggest things that we've heard from the communities that are participating in that network, there's been a few different funding hurdles we've tried to jump through, and they always come back to, it doesn't matter that we didn't get the funding this time or that we have to wait a bit longer or whatever. They're like, the fact that we're collaborating is huge because we've never done this before. So there is a lot of opportunity now for them to collaborate on other initiatives that they didn't see before. So I think it's a great point around why just making that first phone call and asking the question never hurts.
Great. Okay, I am not seeing any other questions in the chat, but again, throughout the rest of this event, if you have questions or something comes to mind for Danielle, Hannah, or Derry, please do put it in the chat. As you can see, Danielle's got her email address up there. So again, please do consider, reaching out to ask questions. This is a really great story. And as Tori said right off at the top of the event, it is kind of the chicken or the egg. If we don't have the infrastructure in, we're not going to see the uptake. So as everyone has said, obviously taking that first step of understanding what's available to you and figuring out how you move forward is obviously, it's not easy, but we've got a lot of resources here throughout the province and beyond to help you on this journey. Okay, so thank you again to Danielle, Hannah, and Derry. And now we are going to move on to our final speaker. Please welcome Jordan Hebard. Jordan is a senior advisor and leads the business development efforts for EV infrastructure and battery energy storage system within Aux Energy, Hydro One's unregulated subsidiary. Jordan, it's a pleasure to have you join us. And maybe before you dive in, you can just explain to the crowd what unregulated subsidiary means. Thanks, Jordan, over to you.
Thanks, Stephanie, and to Oven for organizing this and having us on here today. Before I jump into the presentation, I'm sure at most municipalities, at a lot of these conferences we go to, we start hearing unregulated versus regulated a lot. It's becoming more common to talk about it, with the idea that regulated, which is most utilities, don't have a choice in what they charge their customers because they have the monopoly most of the time on how we power the province and the country. So it would be very unjust to have us have the full say on what the cost would be to what we're charging the customers, because there's no other choice of where you get your power. It just comes out, and you don't get to decide which provider you go to. So the Ontario Energy Board, at least for Ontario, dictates how much we're allowed to charge for electricity in the province. Where unregulated, it's a whole different ball game. You can go, for a phone example, you don't have to go to Apple, you can go to Android, you can go to Google. That's your choice. So that's why the price difference happens. So, and that's the essence of what unregulated versus regulated is. So I will jump in and hopefully the control worked. And let's see. Perfect. Okay. Our test run worked great, Stephanie. So today I get to share some of the lessons learned that we have heard over the last couple of years from part of my time at Hydro One, and then also my time with Siemens when I actually got to do these front-end engineering studies with different municipalities. There may be a few on this call that I got to work with in my past role, but Danielle's point about education and awareness, I think, is going to make the transition to electrification much easier. So I've tried today to just highlight some of the ones that we hear a lot to show that, first of all, that you're not alone if you feel this problem that you're facing, and that we're actively, our group and many other companies are trying to help figure out how we can get to this next step without letting these problems stop us. Before I jump in, I'm just going to quickly explain who Aux Energy is, how that fits in Hydro One, and then I'll jump to more of the problems and solution. And then finally, we've got an example I want to show of a company that is starting to electrify. They're working on it, and I just want to highlight how they've looked at their problems that they had and are moving forward. So Hydro One in Ontario is the utility for the transmission and for the distribution. So it's one of the biggest transmission. We're about 92% of the transmission in Ontario is owned by Hydro One, and about 70% is the distribution. So in total, we cover about 75% geographically of the province, and as I mentioned, that 92% of the transmission. And that would be what I mentioned about the regulated. This is the regulated entity. So we don't have a choice in what we charge our customers. Next slide. The unregulated aspect, there's been a few companies that Hydro One has been creating over the last 20 years. The first, it used to be called Hydro One Telecom. Now it is rebranded as an acronym, if you've seen that. That focuses on telecommunication in rural areas. The next venture into this unregulated space was IV Charging Network. You may have seen it on the en route. So this is our EV network that was a partnership with the Ontario Power Generation, so the generation company in Ontario, which helped deploy for the public facing. And finally, Aux Energy, which is the group I work for, is business to business. So this is helping municipalities electrify their fleet and transit. So like their buses, ambulance, refuse trucks, instead of the more public facing, like what Charge On is helping. And the mission that we're taking in Aux is really to help electrify Ontario in a sustainable way. So we see 3 different main avenues that need to be electrified. First is the fleet charging, and that's where I'm going to focus most of the time today on. The second is batteries. They're becoming even more prevalent. The IESO, which is the system operator in Ontario, has put a very large procurement for these batteries because they see the importance of them. They help with reliability, resilience in the grid, and a lot of control factors that'll make the grid more clean. And then finally, we're trying to help bring some of these services from the regulated side of how we transmit and distribute in the province to these large power drawer companies. It's going to be even more common that companies have large demands, but how they can manage that at their site is really complicated. And that's what Hydro One is really good at. So these 3 things will help make our grid sustainable for the long term, not just for today. So that's what Aux Energy is. But I wanted to start and have a conversation about the problems that we've seen of why we can't electrify, what's stopping us today to get there. Because these mandates, and as one of the problems that I highlight, they're pushing and they're continuing. So we need to start, but it can be quite the hassle. And I've got that down to 6. So I'm going to scare you at the beginning, but I'm going to hopefully get to the good solutions by the end. And if any of these resonate with you, you're not alone. As I mentioned, this is about awareness and education. And if there are some that I missed, I actually had a conversation yesterday. I think Mitchell might even be on this call with a group from the region. And there was one that I missed, which is the education. So I'm going to add this. I didn't have time to update since I sent this already to Stephanie. But I'm going to start with my 6. But please, if there's anything that's not on here, write in the comments something that I may have missed. And I want to continue adding this. These are just from my conversations I've got to have, but we're trying to capture the right thing. So the first is the increasingly complex energy needs. As it was actually mentioned in the comment yesterday in my meeting, it was never the responsibility of the municipality to have charging stations for gasoline vehicles. But now it is on the ownership of municipalities to figure this out. Having that alone is so complex, but now we're trying to get our buildings cleaner because that's such a big emitter of greenhouse gases. We need to have renewables. There's new tech coming up. So it's very hard, especially for smaller municipalities, don't having the big staff or the big funding to understand how to do this. The second problem is there's not a lot of established service providers. This is very new. We're at the frontier of what this is going to happen over the next 25, 30 years. So to look for a company that's been there for 50 years that has 10,000 Google reviews is just not a thing right now. So to understand who is real, who is actually a trusted provider can be a big challenge. The third is the technology is evolving. I like using phones a lot. It makes it very simple. And if you look at a 1990s cell phone, you wouldn't want that today. That was a large brick. It barely could call one person. There's no extra features. But if you look at your iPhone today, you can do anything and everything you want on it. We are unfortunately in those 1990s cell phones. So every year we're getting updates, we're getting changes. To know what is going to be the winner in the end is a big challenge. The fourth issue is the mandates that are set. They are fast moving and quick. Your municipalities are wanting change and they're not going to let us just wait until next year anymore. I think we've done a lot of waiting over the last 50 years and we're pushing this off. And it's really good to see people like Owen and these groups trying to educate to say we can do this together. But it is still a scary task when they're coming very quickly. Supply chain kind of goes the opposite of these mandates. Though every year it's almost we see a longer supply chain of getting the equipment that's necessary for this electrification, which is really impacting how we can do it quickly. And finally, these great programs like Charge On for the funding are really helpful, but it can be confusing, especially for someone that's never applied for government funding. And maybe your budget also, you don't have that financial impact because it's really large, these costs can be. So you might have 1 to 5 done, but you might not have the money. So all of these reasons are why electrification is stopped. So like I mentioned, anything in the chat of something I've missed, but I think those are the main 6 that I see that commonly come up in conversations with different municipalities that are holding us back. So I'll go to hopefully the positive side of the conversation, which is some of the solutions. And this is where we're trying to help fit in. First, Hydro One being a very old company, it's about 130 years old. We know the grid really well. That's what we started on. And we're trying to educate as much as we can of what you need to do, what the process looks like. So I'm going to show later on the slides just an example of how to work, but our expertise in power is going to hopefully help clarify some questions you may have. IV charging network let us have a good deployment history. Like I mentioned, no one's going to have a 40-year deployment history, but we pushed as soon as we could and started having a lot of deployments in the province, which has taught us many things in the last couple of years. That comment about how complex and moving this is, we need to make sure that the investments we're putting in and the time isn't wasted. So thinking past today of how in 10 years, what's the impact going to be 15 can be a big challenge. And we try to think, we've done that a long time. These transmission projects that we do are 30 years. We're very used to having long-term outlooks on how we're going to develop these projects. And we've been here a long time, so we can be one of these trusted providers for you, that we're not taking our transmission wires down anytime soon. They're there to stay, and we're going to be here through the whole journey, even if it is a 20, 30-year journey. The last is what we're trying to do with the supply chain is we procure a lot of equipment, and we're trying to use that as much as we can. We're still having problems with it. So we might not have the solution for it, but we're trying to leverage the relationships that we've built and make it a little bit faster for municipalities to get the equipment they need. And finally, the investment. Aux Energy, similar to Hydro One, wants to invest in Ontario and make sure that we can electrify. And that's what our goal is, really, to help municipalities, is take that large capital out of the first year cost. We will take that cost on, and then we can turn it into operational. So that's what energy as a service is. I think maybe most of you have either heard this term or maybe charging as a service. It's become quite the buzzword lately, but in essence, it's what I just mentioned, is we're converting this upfront capital that can be quite a scary number. Had a few of these calls when we do these feed studies. We give them what their estimated cost is going to be, and there's quite like open eyes to shock with how expensive the infrastructure is. We are able to then take that cost, we can get some smiles away from the scary eyes, and we can turn it into more operational, which is the typical way that municipalities run, is with operational costs year to year. It lets them electrify today instead of waiting until you got that budget approval for these big $1 million projects. And lastly, this idea is making it a turnkey solution. The idea that all you need to do is turn your key and you've got your project done. We deal with all those problems of the different providers and let you have your project ready to go. So I've taken the journey that I see most of the time, and I've split it into two choices. The first is business choices. These are things that are really important. The planning that Danielle mentioned, that you need to spend a lot of the time here, because once you've done this, it really does start flowing, but I don't think there's enough attention to it. And these are what's going to dictate how you can meet your goals, what your mandates are from the government, how you can achieve them in a successful way, because we don't want to have 2 years down the road that we got to reset. So this early consulting, making sure that you've got the funding understood, where you're going to look for it, what kind of infrastructure do you want, then the strategic deployment, looking forward. Do we want a couple pilots? Do we want to start looking, maybe half of our fleet will be electrified by year 3, those kind of questions. And then finally doing these studies that I talked about, a little bit more detail, and it gets more real. You get some project plan, you get some numbers. All of that will let you have a good backing when you make these choices of how you want to move forward as a municipality. Then you get to the execution, which is the second half. You get really into the details of these drawings. You're hiring different consultants to work in it. You're doing these RFPs. You start executing the project, and then you have this long-term 20-year execution, 15 years for these projects. We like spending a lot of time on the business choices, however, because it really does impact these 20-year, like this last bubble on the right, that's a long time. We want to make sure that all the planning is done up front, because it's a little challenging to go back and retrofit if you haven't thought through at the beginning. So we try to spend as much time as possible in this early phase. Here's just a couple examples, and then I'm going to jump down to the company that we've been working with and show how they've overcome their problems. But an idea of some of the things that we need to think about as we electrify is like the grid connection, how we actually go and connect into the utility. What is that going to look like when your loads increase so much? Making sure that you are ready when you've designed and build, and that goes into the studies, what charging equipment you're going to use when you do build this infrastructure, and then the ongoing, the execution side. Who's doing your operation and maintenance? How are you going to view your information and your data as you run it? And then what happens if it breaks at 2 in the morning? All these kind of questions are just an example, but we try to help as you go through, because it can be, again, for this small and medium that doesn't have this big staff, doesn't have 10 electrical engineers on site, it can be really scary, and it feels like you just want to stop right away. So I'm just putting these problems back on the screen because they're Blue Water Recycling Association is who we've been working with. They're a recycling group in Southwestern Ontario, and they are across, I think it's 20 municipalities that they work for. They had a lot of these problems when we had our first conversations. I'm going to highlight a few of how we dealt with some of them. So the first was this increasingly complex energy needs. When we discussed with them based on what their capacity was at site, they had big goals, but they weren't able to do it. So we wanted to break down so that they could achieve them into different phases. So I've just shown on the left side, we've broken down 3 different phases. So they have some charging for this year. The next year, they're going to have 5 more. And then once the upgrades are done 5 years from now, they're going to get the rest of their 30. So we had to be a little bit creative with the timeline, understanding the upgrades that were needed so that we could make sure their goals were understood and achieved. The next problem I talked about was that lack of established service providers. I've just shown on the left only the bus manufacturers of all these different players, and there's so much more that goes into it. Like I mentioned, of what chargers are you going to use, what service are you going to have, what payment setup. It can be really scary. So we wanted to do for them is a good understanding of the market. So I've just listed a few right now on the left, but we went and talked to all these different companies and try to make sure that we could get their best tech, understand where they're at, what are their challenges, so that when we go back to Blue Water, when they're choosing which vehicle to use, they've got the best information ready. And finally, the challenge I'll show is the funding and financing. So these programs like Charge On, the Zero Emission Transit Fund, Green Municipal Fund, there are so many out there that the government is trying to help electrify, but it can be a big task for someone that has never done these programs. So that's where we are stepping in. So we are actually applying for the Green Municipal Fund for this project, but we're managing that so that it's off of Blue Water's plate. They can just focus on their operations, and we can help apply for it, make sure they get the funding. So I've got some case studies, but I think I'll leave it at this for now. I really wanted to focus just on these problems, just to understand with the group that you're not alone when you see these problems, that you're able to get through. And the last thing, with the mandate that we have set for our group, we want to electrify Ontario. If it's not us that's going to help you, at least you know there's a large network of groups that are trying to make sure that we can do it successfully, and we're not going to wait for tomorrow. I think the waiting for tomorrow or we can do it next year is not an answer anymore that's going to be acceptable. So the fact that even there's 61 people on this call right now, all listening, trying to figure out together is, I think, a huge success. So thank you again for the time. If there's any other questions, or if you want to talk to me after, just let me know, and we can set up and we go in more detail.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jordan. That was it's a lot of information, but again, it's really great to know that there are resources like Hydro One and Ox Energy that have the expertise and can obviously support groups like you said, the 61 people that are on this call. Again, I received a direct question, and that question is, maybe just talk to us about how would you recommend fleet operators or municipalities in this case, probably more relevant, approach an LDC, a local distribution company? What's been your experience with how that actually, again, how do you start? How do you get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of the connection, I mentioned it just in the example of what needs to get done, is actually connecting into your utility, making sure that power is available. And that gets done a lot of the time really late in the process. But it's important to just let your LDC know if it is Hydro One or whoever it is in your area. Most rural is a Hydro One, so it would probably be our group that you'd be talking to, and just informing them of your plans. We want to help get you there, and all this information can be done really quickly. Even with this Blue Water project, we had to find out what was possible. We showed them the plans, and within a week we had exactly the timeline of what needed to be done. So I think just reaching out as soon as possible, even if you're not sure the exact plan, but just letting them know you want to, is a great way to make sure you don't have a big delay later on in the project.
Okay, that makes total sense. Danielle, Tori, any final thoughts even on each other's presentations? Obviously, Danielle, you would have had your own, I guess, connections with your LDs, your local distribution companies as well. Any advice there for folks on the line?
No, I'm not going to further comment. Jordan's got it pretty dialed, so.
Okay, let me just check. I don't think we have anything else in the chat. Tori, did you want to add anything?
I'll just add, for our program, we are requiring for projects with a total power draw of 50 kilowatts or higher to contact your local LDC and fill out what we're calling a preliminary electrical feasibility assessment form. And this is not something that's set in stone or reserves your place in the queue for power capacity, but it really is to make sure that applicants are fostering that dialogue with LDCs, which Jordan mentioned is so important for a project to be successful. And so we encourage you, again, though this is not a first come, first serve program, understandably, LDCs need some time to administratively complete forms, and in some areas there may be quite a volume that they are dealing with, and so do encourage you to talk to your LDC as soon as possible and complete that form to start the conversation.
Okay, that's great advice. Another piece of advice, oh, actually, you know what? I see Emily from Sault Ste. Marie has put a question in the chat, and it says, is there a template for the form in the charge on guide?
Yeah, great question. There is. I think it's the very last page of the guide. And I believe on our application portal proper, there is also just the form by itself.
Okay, great. Emily says she's still making her way through the guide. So, but again, Tori, it's helpful to know that there are resources and supports for these kinds of questions. So we will continue to promote that to the group on the line today. As well, Oven does have a resource, probably a lot of you know about it, called the Regional Technology Development Sites. They are also, specifically involved with, regional work. So anyone who's calling in from a municipality, Oven can connect you with the Regional Technology Development Site in your area to get some business support, some advice. And again, we've talked a lot about, a lot of this is to do with collaboration. There's a lot of relationship building that can happen here, and Oven is thrilled and of course available to help support. So let's continue this dialogue. As we mentioned, please connect with any of us on the line today. We'll be sure to post some more information in our LinkedIn chat. and I will send a follow-up email to everyone with the link to the slides as well as the recording. Looks like we do not have any more questions in the chat, so want to officially thank everyone. Oh, Olivia slipped in at the last second there. So is there information on how municipalities are setting charging prices to the chargers? Great question. Not sure where Olivia is joining from, but I would assume, Jordan, that might be directed to you.
I can answer too after.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Danielle, if you want to start again, my
Sure,
more
okay.
expertise is on the back end, helping with the transit with their buses fleet.
No worries. So in our experience, obviously with the over hundreds of EV charging stations we've helped install, there's an approach for level 2 chargers and then an approach for level 3. So level 2s are the ones where people stop and stay longer. This all assumes, of course, that the usage was in what is currently the format is you pay for the time that you're at the station. Now, if you're not familiar, this is going to change in the future. You'll be paying for the kilowatt consumed and not the time parked at the charger. That makes a lot more sense if you think about it. When you go to a gas pump and plug up your fill up your internal combustion engine, you don't pay for how long you're at the pump, you pay for the volume you consume. So the Measurement Canada change that is coming certainly makes a lot more sense. All that said, right now you're charging time per use. So on a level 2 charger, a pretty fair rate is somewhere between $1.50 to $2 per hour of use. That'll get you, anecdotally, that'll cover your cost to provide the electricity to the driver. It'll have then about a little, 60% profit that can help you cover annual networking and warranty fees that come with owning and operating a charging station, and then a little bit of profit to set aside, or additional revenue, I guess, not profit, additional revenue to set aside to cover asset retirement obligations or other things that will come up when it comes to owning level 2 infrastructure. On level 3s, it's a little different. We don't typically recommend that municipalities own and operate level 3s. They're very expensive charging equipment. Best in class today is retailing for $200,000 plus. So that's an asset you have to put on your liability register. And then there's operational networking and fees like that are quite expensive. They can be in the 20 to more thousands of dollars of a year, and you'd have to budget and set that aside. You might not recoup those costs in the early days of deployment, so just things to keep in mind. And then back to your question about the cost to charge, you'll typically see those around, they're charged per minute, not per hour, because you're usually there for minutes, not hours. Every charging event is different though, but per minute, you'll see those costs range from like 50 cents to 65 cents is the highest I've seen. As low as 30 cents. It all depends. That is again informed by what the cost of electricity is to that station, and then those other hidden costs that you might not be as familiar with. So long-winded answer, but there's a lot of complexity. And I always like to say, anytime anyone asks me anything related to EVs and EV charging, is my first response is always, it depends. So there's a lot of nuances, and you can have a good rule of thumb, but you have to be prepared that things don't always go as intended.
Thank you, Danielle. Your wealth of knowledge is certainly appreciated. And actually, that brings up a good question, which maybe Tori, you're thinking along the same lines. Do you want to talk about level chargers with regards to the funding and how that's going to be evaluated?
Sure. So I'll just piggyback on Danielle's answer. Regarding user fees for our funding program, we've kept it open. So we did have questions, do these charges have to be free, so on and so forth. You can charge fees. It is up to the applicant, the user fee structure that they want to pursue. It can also be free of charge. So just to make that clear for anyone interested in applying. And so Stephanie, to your question about sort of differences between level 2 and level 3, I think Danielle, great insight in terms of really like what is the appropriate tool for the job for municipalities in community settings. I think you know, in talking with folks that are newer to the charging game, often, you know, okay, well, let's go for level 3 because it's the most powerful, it's the best. And as I think, you know, I would side with Danielle, that it really is for a specific use case. And so for level 2 chargers, thinking about, you know, downtown districts where you can plug in for a while, walk downtown, and you know, or a community center. So thinking about those types of things. And in terms of how we're evaluating the level 2 versus level 3 distinction in the Charge On program, because we will get both, we hope to get both. The level 3 proposals are going to be very much focused in terms of, is this filling a gap? And so, you know, I referenced the geospatial tool. What is the distance to the next charger and the charger after that? We'll be thinking about that. That will wait more so than in the level 2 context, when we're looking about, you know, what's the population around, what types of uses would be supported through that level 2 charger. And again, like, you folks are the experts of your communities. Tell us in your application why this is a significant site and is most appropriate for that type of, you know, plug in and stay a while charging use.
Fantastic. Okay, I think that we are done with questions. Dan, thank you for putting your email in the chat. So as I mentioned, our regional development technology or regional technology development sites that Oven is connected with, Dan, who's put his email in the chat, can help connect you to your locally situated RTDS. So again, we highly encourage this, you know, sharing of information. Let's ask questions, let's connect with each other, because as we have all said, we need to do this, but B, we need to really be collaborative and cohesive and think about this strategy as one big province, and of course, one big country. So on that note, I'm going to thank our speakers today, Jordan, Danielle, Tori, Derry, and Hannah. Thank you so much for your time, as well as your expertise. I think that you have all opened up probably a lot more questions for everyone, but as we said, questions are really the first step to getting started. So thank you so much. Reminder that we will send an email out with the link to these resources. We will also be sure to share more resources in our LinkedIn group. And again, please feel free to email me directly. I think you all have my email address. Any questions you have, any connections we can make, any support we can provide, we're happy to do it. And we look forward to speaking with you again. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.